Hello, and welcome to this webinar presented by the IFRS Foundation. I'm Neil Stewart, Director of Corporate Outreach, and I'm your host today. First, some housekeeping. We encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A window. We won't get to all of them today, and some might be outside the scope of today's themes, but rest assured, we will consider all of them in our educational efforts and in our communications going forward. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the IFRS Knowledge Hub. We have closed captioning enabled. You can turn it on in Zoom. A caveat though, live closed captioning won't be 100% accurate, but we hope that it helps with the accessibility of the webinar. Another quick disclaimer, the information and topics discussed during this webinar do not constitute implementation guidance from the IFRS Foundation. Well, I'd like to say welcome to everyone joining live from around the world, as well as those listening on demand. Who's in the audience? Here's a look at our registration. Nearly 1,100 people from 100 jurisdictions, topped by the UK and US, but really spread across the Americas, Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and Asia, Oceania. And in terms of role, the largest groups are consultants, sustainability officers, and finance and reporting executives, as well as the accounting profession and academia. Well, our topic for today's episode, how the IFRS Foundation is supporting preparers, companies, regulators, in getting started with the ISSB standards. We'll discuss our capacity building and regulatory implementation programs, as well as multiple other initiatives underway with our stakeholders, including preparers and investors, policymakers and regulators, data platform providers, and other standard setters. And one of the most common questions asked during our last episode was, where can we find additional resources to help implement the standards? Well, today we'll try to answer that question and point you to a number of different implementation support resources. Our hope is that you come out of this webinar better equipped to get started on reporting with the ISSB standards. And the links to the resources will be added in the chat as we go along and sent to you in a follow-up email. We'll also send out a copy of the slides. Now, who are our speakers today? Well, to lead off the discussion in just a moment, I'm joined by Jingdong Hua, Vice-Chair of the ISSB. And I want to welcome our guest speakers, this time an all in-house, all IFRS Foundation lineup. Future episodes will feature our capacity building partners, but today I'm joined by Dianora Aria DeMarco, ISSB Technical Fellow and IFRS S1 and S2 Implementation Lead. Lily Paul Neveu, Partnership Manager on our capacity building team. Maren Myers, ISSB Educational Lead, and Jonathan Bravo, Director of Regulatory Affairs. Jingdong, please start us off with an overview of the IFRS Foundation's comprehensive capacity building program.
Thank you, Neil. And let me first thank our panelists and colleagues for joining us. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the entire team for launching this webinar series, which the name suggests will provide useful perspectives on the use of ISSB standards to all market participants. Let me start by stating the obvious. The best place to start your journey in using the ISSB standards is to read the standards themselves, as well as the accompanying guidance, which includes webinars introducing you to the standards, already available in 7 translations and counting. That's the starting point. But as you will see today, there is much more support available for preparers who start using the standards. The IFRS Foundation's responsibilities do not stop at standard setting. Achieving a true global baseline of sustainability-related disclosures necessitates a strong focus on supporting implementation across all economic settings so that all market participants can access its benefits. To help companies get ready to report using S1 and S2, particularly those in emerging markets, transition reliefs and proportionality mechanisms are built into the standard requirements to aid implementation. The ISSB has sought to achieve a balance between the cost for companies to apply the requirements and ensuring investors are provided with consistent, comparable, and verifiable information. The need for the IFRS Foundation to support capacity building has been reiterated by the market. In the feedback from public consultation of IFRS S1 and S2 exposure drafts, stakeholders commented that given the amount of resources and preparedness needed to apply some of the proposed requirements, many companies might need more support from the ISSB, including guidance and examples. The capacity building partnership framework was developed in response to this. At COP27, we launched the capacity building program with the aim of building market readiness for adoption and implementation of ISSB standards globally, with a specific focus on emerging markets and developing economies. So high-quality resources and educational material, as well as tailored education sessions free of charge. The partnership approach, over 40 capacity building partners critical to the program's success, sees our partners apply their specialist knowledge to understand and respond to the capacity building needs of different stakeholders, which includes government, multilaterals, standard setters, professional bodies, shared interest initiatives, leading professional service firms, academic institutions, and philanthropic entities. It is global in remit, but with an emphasis on emerging markets and developing economies. There are 4 pillars of the capacity building program: advocacy and engagement, education, technical assistance, and local ownership. I know colleagues will speak about key initiatives the foundation has delivered to support the market. I would like to mention one, which is particularly close to my heart as former treasurer of the World Bank, which is our strategy with multilateral banks. We have recently signed an MOU with IFC, the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and a letter of intent with the African Development Bank to support capacity building, training, and technical assistance for the adoption and implementation of ISSB standards. As we continue to engage with and assess market needs for support, we always welcome continued feedback on the ISSB standards for us to be able to provide support to the market in this program. Back to you, Neil.
Well, thank you, Jingdong. And the ISSB has been praised for its speed in setting the standards and issuing them since we were created in 2021. But clearly, the pace of standard setting is matched by the progress in capacity building. So it's really quite impressive. Let's hear from our panelists, and they really represent different areas of work within the IFRS Foundation: technical, capacity building and strategic affairs, education, and regulatory affairs. And a reminder to our audience, after an initial round of comments, we'd love to take your questions. So let's start with our technical team, who have not only been working on the standards themselves, but also creating guidance and educational material. So Dianora, tell us about that work.
Sure, I would love to, Neil. Thank you. I want to open with this slide, and this sets out the outcome of the ISSB's agenda consultation. And what I particularly want you to focus on is this box on the slide. You'll see that we're emphasizing that the ISSB has prioritized as its highest level of focus to support the implementation of S1 and S2. So this really sets the scene for what we're all going to talk about today as part of this webcast: the ISSB's current and ongoing commitment to support the implementation of these standards. I'm going to focus specifically on the materials that are available to support stakeholders, and I'm also going to talk about one of the feedback loops we have to support these efforts. And I'd like to start with the supporting materials here on the slide. These first 2 buckets, we have application guidance and accompanying guidance. These were published with the standards at the same time as the standards. The application guidance is included directly within each standard, and therefore it's required to be applied. Application guidance, this includes further guidance on, for example, what is meant by sustainability-related risks and opportunities, materiality, climate resilience, among other things. The accompanying guidance now, moving to the middle of this slide, This is not required to be applied, but it does include illustrative guidance and illustrative examples that could be helpful when applying the standards. So these two supporting materials, these are available on our website and came out at the same time as the standard. The third bucket here, this educational material, this is really separate to the standard, and publishing educational material has been ongoing since the issuance of S1 and S2. And I want to use the next slide actually to talk about educational material because it lists out all the materials that we've produced to date. So I won't speak in much detail on any of these. The point here is to highlight what is available and to share the links to these resources with all of you. But at a high level, you'll notice on the left here, there's quite a bit out there on how to apply our standards. And in this grouping on the middle of the slide, the other materials, you'll see there's guidance on applying ESRS at the same time as the ISSB standards, and also applying GRI standards with the ISSB standards in the context of greenhouse gas emissions. And the last thing on the slide I just want to preview are some of the materials that we have in the pipeline that you can look forward to, including materiality, proportionality, and scenario analysis, with more to come. Let's go to the next slide. Another way that the ISSB supports implementation of the standards is through the Transition Implementation Group on IFRS S1 and S2. We refer to this group as the TIG. And one of the purposes of the TIG is to provide a public forum for stakeholders to learn about the standards from others who are involved in implementation. So this group has about 13 preparers, 4 assurance providers, and they meet quarterly to discuss implementation questions. And I think the key message here is that all TIG papers, the TIG discussions, the TIG summaries, these are all really educational in nature, and they're all publicly available on our website. We also record a podcast after these TIG meetings. If we go back to the previous slide, we also record a podcast after these TIG meetings, and that's available to you as well. The other really key point I want to highlight is this right hand of the slide, and it's just that any stakeholder can submit an implementation question. So we encourage you to send in your questions, and so long as they meet the criteria, which is linked to the bottom of the slide, we'll be able to discuss your question at the public meeting. And what I do want to wrap up with is just showing where you can find all these materials that I've just talked about on the IFRS Foundation website. So this slide just shows you, when you go to the IFRS Foundation website, you'll see at the top of the website 3 options. I want you to click on IFRS Sustainability, then on Application Support. And this will bring you to the screen that you're looking at on the left-hand side of this slide. Choose the standard at the bottom of the page for which you'd like to see the educational material, and it'll bring you to the page that we've clipped here on the right, and it links to the educational materials, different webcasts that we've done, as well as the TIG and the related resources for that group. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Neil.
Thank you, Dianora, and thanks for highlighting all the resources available there. And you know, the TIG, the Transition Implementation Group, is so interesting and so interesting to listen to. It actually is quite fascinating to hear those meetings and to hear not only the specific questions and discussion around the standards, but also to hear something about how these issuers are approaching sustainability disclosure, where they're at in their journey. It's great listening. So let's go now to Lily from our capacity building team and tell us how you work with strategic partners to help with market readiness and implementation support.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here. So one of our key priorities is to support implementation of IFRS S1 and S2 through our capacity building program. And this slide shows the objectives of the program. So one is awareness raising and stakeholder outreach. So we engage with partners and participate in global events, conferences, workshops, climate weeks, COPs, G20 and G7 meetings. And 2, we produce high quality resources and educational materials to support the market. So Dianora has just presented some of the amazing work done by the technical team so far. We also curate third-party resources through our Knowledge Hub, and I will come back to that. And 3, we develop specialized training for key audiences, such as national stock exchanges and regulators, with a focus on emerging and developing economies. So the partnership framework that Jingdong introduced is crucial to these efforts. So we collaborate with professional accounting associations, multilateral organizations, accounting firms, and groups representing preparers, investors, and stock exchanges to deliver free of charge, large-scale capacity building initiatives globally. So if you want to participate in these workshops and training sessions, look for the links we provide during and after this webinar, or contact our capacity building team. And let me highlight a couple of examples to illustrate this partnership approach. So one of our trusted partners is the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. With them, we designed a half-day training and model guidance to support adoption and implementation on a global scale. So we've conducted 25 sessions with over 5,000 participants so far. And if you want to attend a workshop, you can do so. You just go on the UNSSE Academy website to see if a training is offered by your stock exchange in your jurisdiction. Or we also hold global sessions where everyone can attend free of charge this half-day training. Another initiative is our collaboration with PAFA, the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. Funding was provided to PAFA to create a comprehensive ISSB capacity building strategy. The objective is to empower 125,000 African accountants in 45 African jurisdictions on IFRS S1 and S2. And this will ensure African accountants are well positioned, and it will also help unlocking capital flow to and within the African continent. So if you are in Africa and interested, stay tuned to our website and PAFA's website. We're also collaborating with, plenty of other organizations. So GRI on the Sustainability Innovation Lab, IOSCO, CDP, UN agencies, professional accountancy organizations, and more to develop capacity building training programs. So now I'd like to draw your attention to our Knowledge Hub, which was launched last year. It contains over 150 curated, third-party, free-to-access resources supporting preparers with their disclosures. So we're continuously expanding this hub to meet market need. This webinar series, Perspectives on Sustainability Disclosure, is another initiative to address knowledge gaps, and all episodes will be available for replay on the Knowledge Hub. And just to conclude, I want to thank all our partners and supporters who are working with us to achieve our objectives. Thank you so much. And back to you, Neil.
Thank you, Lily. It's quite amazing to see the lineup of partners, and I think they really demonstrate the convergence of sustainability with the capital markets and sustainability disclosure with accounting discipline and processes and controls, bringing it up to the level of financial reporting. So amazing job. Well, let's go down to Maren, and Maren is our education lead. She's recently been appointed to identify and prioritize educational material according to market needs. And maybe, Maren, you could tell us about some important resources that are already available.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Neil. So in addition to this fantastic list of technical resources, as well as capacity building initiatives, I want to take a moment to just spotlight one unique program of ours, as well as a couple of other resources that kind of indirectly support implementation of the ISSB standards. And so the program that I'm referring to is, of course, the Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting Credential, more commonly known as the FSA credential. This is a credential offered by the IFRS Foundation, originally developed by ISSB back in 2015, and has been updated to fully incorporate the content and learning objectives related to the ISSB standards. And so it's two parts. It's designed for both preparers as well as investors. We also see a large number of folks in the consulting profession pursuing the credential as well. And in level one, we focus on teaching principles. This is where you'll learn what we kind of call the common language for sustainability disclosure. So here you learn things such as, at a conceptual level, the connection between sustainability matters, again, a company's financial performance and prospects. You gain a deep understanding of the sustainability disclosure landscape, core concepts that are needed to navigate the landscape, such as materiality. And we also introduce kind of various ways that companies and investors use sustainability disclosure standards, as well as the information that they produce, kind of all in the name of improved decision-making, regardless of your professional role. And then in level two, we really focus in on practices. This is what you can consider kind of the harder analytical skills involved. So here you're equipped with an understanding of kind of the universe of possible sustainability-related risks and opportunities. You learn how to identify comparable sustainability data, how to normalize that data to enhance its comparability, and more generally, how to integrate sustainability information into comparative analysis, fundamental analysis, even valuation. And so I think one important thing to note here is that it won't teach you kind of step-by-step how to prepare disclosures using the ISSB standards, but it can be a great option for anybody who's looking to kind of upskill themselves or their staff in this space. And you can find more information about the credential by navigating through the courses page on the Knowledge Hub, where you'll find more details about the curriculum, pricing, how to register, and so on. We could pop to the next slide. And then we also have a few resources that are useful if you are a preparer that is or would like to apply the ISSB standards in conjunction with the integrated reporting framework. The first is a transition guide that's specific to integrated reporting that takes the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standard, the ISSB standards, into consideration. You can also find this on the Knowledge Hub. And then the second here is a tool that we've developed to map IFRS S1 and S2 requirements to the integrated reporting framework. And you can find this on the integrated reporting page on ifrs.org. We'll go to the next slide. And then lastly here, kind of leaving ifrs.org and going over to SASB.org, I want to highlight just a couple of additional resources. SASB.org is, of course, where you can download the SASB standards directly. But there are a couple of additional pieces that are particularly useful for those who are looking to just get acquainted or get started with the SASB standards themselves. So the first is what we call our materiality finder. This is essentially an interactive version of the SASB standards. Be really useful for kind of getting familiar with the topics that may present sustainability related risks or opportunities to companies in various industries. And then the second is a written guide for getting started. Here, you can become kind of acquainted with the structure and terminology of the standards and use this as a reference to really just understand the basics about the SASB standards and kind of build that solid foundation of understanding. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. And yeah, it's amazing to see the progress of the FSA. Over 8,000 people have studied for that. And I've seen it in job postings as a requirement. I've seen it or heard about it in RFPs for assurance providers. And I can tell you, I've done level 1, and it's no walk in the park. I was very proud and a little bit surprised when I passed that. So I really do recommend that credential. So we also have our Director of Regulatory Affairs with us, Jonathan Bravo, and a lot of the resources that we've talked about so far have been for preparers, but we are also looking to help build capacity for jurisdictions, for regulators, for national standard setters. So Jonathan, please tell us a bit about that work.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Yeah, we did publish the inaugural jurisdictional guide at the end of May, coinciding with the IOSCO annual meeting. And we also announced the positive momentum towards the adoption of ISSB standards, with over 20 jurisdictions having taken steps towards adopting or otherwise using ISSB standards. And we can move to the previous slide, please, just for 1 second. We were really encouraged to see that jurisdictions from across all regions, both from the global north and the global south, are on that journey, which actually underscores the value of ISSB standards for capital markets. And many others are also considering how to move ahead, introducing ISSB standards into their respective regulatory frameworks. We can move to the next slide. It was precisely with this vision to support jurisdictions in their pathways to adopt or otherwise use ISSB standards that we developed the jurisdictional guide. And its purpose was really twofold. Firstly, to promote globally consistent and comparable information for capital markets by providing information that's useful for jurisdictions as they plan and design their pathways to adoption. And secondly, in order to provide transparency to the markets about jurisdictional frameworks and progress towards the adoption or other use of standards. So it was on the basis of the jurisdictional guide that we plan to develop jurisdictional profiles describing the jurisdiction's approach to the adoption of ISSB standards. We think this will help investors understand the extent of comparability with ISSB standards, preparers that have cross-border activities gain insights into jurisdictional requirements that they may be subject to, and also regulators understanding where their peers are heading. And also importantly, it will support global bodies like IOSCO or the Financial Stability Board, who have already expressed an interest in monitoring jurisdictional and global jurisdictional progress and global developments. So if we can move to the next slide. We plan to develop those jurisdictional profiles once the jurisdictional frameworks are finalized. A number of jurisdictions are in the process of consulting. But until then, and also in that spirit of providing transparency, we are in our website providing information about jurisdictional consultations as a way to inform stakeholders of where jurisdictions are heading. And this provides, I think, an opportunity for stakeholders, including those of you participating in this webinar today, to weigh in and share your perspectives. Certainly, we believe that the establishment of the global baseline of ISSB standards will have a role in mitigating the risks of regulatory fragmentation and deliver information that's comparable and useful for investors and cost-effective for preparers. If we can move to the next slide. And acknowledging the need that has been expressed from jurisdictions in order to support the ecosystem in the process, we also published the regulatory implementation program. So this program really provides a framework on how we plan to work together with our partners, and Lily has touched on that, to support jurisdictions on their journeys. And of course, as standard setters, our plan is really to develop materials, tools, and resources that can assist jurisdictions in their decision-making, and that can also be used by international bodies, IOSCO, multilateral development banks, our partners, in delivering the level of support that is needed. So I think with that, back to you, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I can tell you, there are a lot of people looking forward to the jurisdictional profiles. One of the #1 questions I get in my market engagement work is, how can we track the adoption of the ISSB standards in different jurisdictions around the world? So no pressure or anything, but we're waiting for them. So looking forward to them. Well, there is one additional resource that I would like to tell you about just before we go to Q&A with our panelists, and that's the IFRS Sustainability Alliance. It's our global membership program for sustainability standards, integrated reporting, and integrated thinking, now with over 400 member organizations, including companies, investors, many others, getting access to education tools, peer-to-peer networking, to support you on your sustainability journey. So another great resource. All right, well, thank you to our panelists for those introductory comments and for sharing your slides. And let's get some questions from the audience. And I think that we're getting some good ones in. Keep them coming. And I think I'd like to send the first one to our Vice Chair Jingdong Hua. And you talked about emerging markets and developing economies. But this question is, what's different about emerging markets in terms of their needs around sustainability disclosure and then the capacity building that you're providing?
Well, thank you, Neil. As the ISSB standards establish the global baseline of sustainability disclosure, we need to make sure that there is a level playing field in terms of the preparedness and readiness of companies in all jurisdictions to begin adopting our standard. When you survey the landscape, it is very clear that the majority of companies which already report their sustainability risks and opportunities are in developed countries. This clearly indicates that companies in emerging markets and developing economies need more support to get ready to adopt our standards. Also, as Lily mentioned, global policymakers such as the United Nations, G20, G7, OECD, World Bank, IMF also urge us to put capacity building for emerging markets and developing economies as an integral part of our commitment to support global South adoption, with the potential to unlock capital flow for climate and transition financing. Over.
Okay, thank you, Jingdong. That's very helpful. Okay, here's a good question for Jonathan on the regulatory front. This is about how we engage with jurisdictions. So the question is, as more and more jurisdictions look to implement the ISSB standards, is the IFRS Foundation engaging with those governments directly to encourage alignment with the standards, as much alignment with the standards as possible? And what do these outreach programs look like?
Indeed, and that's it's a really good question, and that was particularly what we wanted to address with the publication of the jurisdictional guide. It was providing a framework that was useful for jurisdictions, for the relevant regulators, for the key authorities there in designing their frameworks in a way that they could deliver the degree of comparability and consistency. So we exposed a number of features that would help them design their frameworks in a way that they can deliver functionally aligned outcomes. So we are engaging, of course, with our jurisdictional working group. It brings together a number of regulators across the world. We have close relationships, I think, with IOSCO, and we do have also, together with our partners and the regulatory implementation program, the attempt to try to support them as they are putting together their considerations as to how to progress on that journey to adopt our standards. Again, in a way that their standards can be aligned with ours, in a way that supports the degree of consistency and comparability that markets are demanding.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Now, a question for Dianora and on the technical front, and the question is, what's happening to the ISSB standards and updating them? Of course, a really key resource to for the implementation of S1 and S2. So the question is, what's happening to the ISSB standards in updating them, and how can stakeholders be engaged in developments?
Yeah, Neil, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. When I started my session, my portion of this webinar, I spoke a bit about the agenda consultation and the outcome of that agenda consultation. And if you notice, the second item on that list was enhancing the ISSB standards and beginning new research and standard setting projects. So this demonstrates that the ISSB is committed to continuing to enhance these the ISSB standards, which is really important in the context of industry-based disclosures and sustainability disclosures broadly. The way that stakeholders can stay up to date on all of this is by signing up for alerts on the IFRS Foundation website. We have our board meetings, and this upcoming board meeting will be discussing the ISSB standards and the work being done on there. And then also stakeholders can take a look at the educational materials that I spoke to earlier. We have a webinar and a written bit of educational materials that goes into a bit of an explainer on the ISSB standards for anyone who's interested in a bit more background on the ISSB standards.
Great, thank you, Dianora. That's really helpful. Question about the FSA credential, Maren, and the question is, I guess the question is, how broad is it? The question is, how does it help with other standards in the landscape and understanding how they fit together, such as the CSRD? So perhaps the question is it only on the ISSB standards, or does it provide a perspective on the broader landscape? And another question, a related question is, can you recommend reading materials around S1 and S2 that might help people taking the FSA credential?
Sure. Yeah, happy to touch on both of those questions. So related to the first, the level 1 curriculum in particular does touch on kind of not only the ISSB standards, but kind of how the landscape for sustainability disclosure, particularly when it comes to other voluntary standards and frameworks, has evolved in recent years and kind of gone through a cycle of consolidation in order to reach where the ISSB standards are. And we also discuss the relation, the ISSB standards as they compare to other options in the market, like CSRD, like GRI, kind of from a conceptual level. So considering broadly what type of information they're prompting companies to disclose, how they approach materiality in different ways, and different audiences that might be involved in kind of using the disclosures that companies produce. So we do touch on that in a variety of ways, really focusing at more of a conceptual level as well as the landscape as a whole. And then to your second question, so when you register for the FSA credential, you're automatically provided with the kind of body of testable material. So that comes in the form of 2 study guides, one for level 1, one for level 2. And these are very robust materials, about 250 pages long. And they include many references, of course, to not material that you need in order to pass the exam, but other kind of references that you might find just useful self-education or reading on your own. So outside of registering for the FSA, I can't necessarily say there's a specific resource I can point you to help you prepare, but you are equipped with all of the materials that you need upon registration.
Terrific. Yeah, excellent study guides for FSA level 1 and 2. Thank you, Marin. Okay, here's a good question for you, Jonathan, to put you on the spot on interoperability, and particularly interoperability with the EU. And the question is, how are we viewing the EU's work on sector standards vis-a-vis our own sector approach? And I think that, you know, even the interoperability guidance as published has some good reference to already how there's interplay or interoperability, right?
Right. And I think our colleagues from IFRAC, they have advanced that they will be progressing on their sector-specific work, and they have already announced that they will take as reference the work that we have been conducting with respect to ISSB standards. And of course, we have also announced that as part of our work plan, we also plan to conduct work in order to enhance, I think, ISSB standards as part of our 2-year work plan. So I think in terms of interoperability, it is an ongoing process, and it's basically ensuring that both teams come together to ensure that whatever is tabled, I think at the IFRAC level, takes the advantage of benefiting from the work that we have already progressed, and likewise that we are attentive to what they're doing in terms of future work in areas where we are already exploring our work.
So really a commitment to that working together, interoperability going forward. And of course, as the interoperability guidance makes clear already, you know, the ESRS are plain that you can use the ISSB standards or other common industry practices, but including the ISSB standards to meet the sector requirements of ESRS, which is a great interoperability with the ISSB standards. Another good question here for, I think for Dianora, and the question is, I guess there's two sides to it, and you can judge how closely related they are. But the question is, can more comment on the work underway with the GRI? And also, what about our work on materiality and explaining materiality, and perhaps explaining the contrast between investor materiality and double materiality?
Great, Neil. Two really good and important questions. I'll start with GRI. We continue to collaborate with GRI. We signed an initial MOU back in 2022 with them, and more recently our second MOU in May of this year. And the intention here is to optimize how the standards, the GRI standards and the ISSB standards, can be used together to facilitate reporting on an organization's impacts and also its risks and opportunities. So the ISSB and GRI are going to do a pilot on biodiversity to see how some of the reporting and some of the alignment where we can work together on that. So that's the latest on GRI. Materiality, I think this is something that everyone is really interested in. And there were two parts to your question. One, just more of an update on where we are maybe on the educational material. So I will share that the ISSB is developing educational material on materiality and what materiality means in the ISSB standards. We've met with the board in February of this year to discuss it, and we are working on finalizing that educational material. And we think that that will be very helpful for understanding not only what materiality means in the ISSB standards, which is about, you know, the materiality of information, but it'll also be helpful in explaining what we apply materiality to. So we're applying it in the context of sustainability related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect your prospects. So we're also explaining what that means, because that's what we are asking stakeholders to provide material information about. So more to come on that. We will be publishing that, and it'll be available for all on our website. A bit on the difference between impact materiality and financial materiality. Maybe I won't go into so much detail on that, but there will be elements of that as part of the educational material that we plan to publish, not in extensive detail, because of course we are focused on what the market and others call financial materiality. So the emphasis will be there, but we will touch on this at a high level in that educational material.
Fantastic. Thank you. And you referred to our biodiversity research and potential future standard setting. And of course, that was explained quite well in our feedback statement that was published just a few weeks ago, the feedback statement on our work plan. But we did get a question here about the two new research projects, human capital and biodiversity, or bees. And I think that, what is the status of those projects is the question. But I think given the theme of today's webinar, what about resources to follow those projects and potentially even get involved? Could you comment on that again from the perspective of the technical team?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good opportunity to also explain how these two projects have been added to our agenda. So of course, before we can add a project as a standing project to any IFRS Foundation agenda. So what I mean is the IASB follows the same process, is they first need to be research projects. So right now for both biodiversity and human capital, these are research projects on our agenda. So the staff working on those projects are understanding what the current reporting landscape is in these areas, what existing reporting frameworks exist out there. And we're really informed by the feedback we got during the agenda consultation. These were some of the questions that were asked to stakeholders. So the resources to follow that you asked about, Neil, I think my biggest suggestion would be to continue to watch our board meetings. So the board meetings are being publicly broadcasted, and they're not always decision-making meetings. So at times it's the staff providing an update to the board on the progress of this work. So the board meetings will cover things such as the progress on the research for biodiversity and human capital. So I think that's the big tip I would share to this group.
Thank you. All right, two more quick questions before we wrap up, and one for Lily, and then I think I have one for Jonathan. So Lily, you showed that slide with all the capacity building partners. The question here is, what are those partners saying about the market needs for education and training and capacity building?
So the capacity building partners, they're in touch with the market directly, with their clients, with their members. And, some questions can be really topic specific, such as what we heard today, materiality assessment, scenario analysis. But really what we're hearing in the training sessions as well is what we're hearing the most is, how do we report? How do I do this? How do I get started? So we're really at the beginning of the journey. And with our partners, we're really trying to doubling efforts. And with this, actually this webinar series as well, provide training, provide quality information with our partners. And we cannot do it alone, really. We're doing it with partners, with this partnership approach. Great
point. Jonathan, last question for you. We're actually getting a lot of questions coming in about different jurisdictions, individual jurisdictions, and their progress towards adoption. I can see questions on Mexico, on India, on UK, and more, and we can't get into each one individually, but generally, how can stakeholders keep up to date, and what is the pattern that we're seeing with consultations?
I think at this stage, as I mentioned before, we're making resources available on our website. I think a very straightforward one is those jurisdictions that are consulting publicly on their approaches. I think I saw a couple of questions on the UK, Mexico, India, and there are things moving along. Some of those discussions and some of the deliberations are still taking place within the ecosystem. I think at some point they will go public. I think, for instance, the UK, they have already articulated what the process is going to be. We just need to wait until the results of the endorsement process. As we go forward, and as I mentioned, we will develop jurisdictional profiles for those jurisdictions that have finalized their jurisdictional frameworks. And we do have a tab on our website providing information about the use of ISSB standards around the world. And I would invite stakeholders, interested parties to consult that website as we plan to develop profiles later on this year.
Terrific. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, well, we're coming to a conclusion, and maybe Jingdong, having heard some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience and the comments from the different teams in the foundation, what would you add as a parting message from the ISSB to preparers and other stakeholders?
Yes, thank you, Neil. I think, as my colleagues have mentioned in this webinar, we would like to have inputs and feedback from stakeholders as they begin their adoption journey. Therefore, for example, engage with us through the transition implementation group. You can already watch the first two meetings of the TIG. As when I watched it, I find them very informative in terms of surfacing some of the most asked questions when preparers start to adopt our standard. I would also like to remind listeners how important it is to get involved in jurisdictional consultations to support decisions being made about sustainability reporting to help deliver the global baseline of sustainability information for capital market. And the final word is begin to adopt the ISSB standard yourselves. The best way to learn is by doing. And as this webinar series have demonstrated, we will help you along the way. By the way, great work, Neil, for your fantastic moderating.
Thanks, Jingdong. But thank you most especially, and thank you very much to Dianora and Maren, Lily, and Jonathan, my colleagues from the IFRS Foundation, for joining us in this webinar. Thank you to everyone for listening live and on demand. And for those of you in our audience, please stay involved with the IFRS Foundation, including through this webinar series. Follow our LinkedIn and news updates to learn more about the series and a variety of topics. The next one we're planning is on the value of industry-based disclosure and explaining some of the resources in more detail around the ISSB standards. We'll also be looking at how companies are developing systems, processes, controls, and governance around sustainability data. So also listen to the ISSB's monthly podcast, typically featuring our chair, Emmanuel Faber, and Vice-Chair Sue Lloyd. So thank you again. And I'm Neil Stewart with the IFRS Foundation on behalf of the team here. Thank you for participating. And until next time, goodbye.